Greek Mythology Introduction. The stories of Greek mythology forged the common Greek identity and have been a key influence in the development of Western European art, music, and literature since their debut in the 8th century BC via the epic poems of Homer. These poems mark the introduction of the Olympians, divinities with human flaws who presided over the fortunes of mortal men. In about 1900 BC, Greek-speaking people from the Caucasus migrated to the southern European peninsula known today as Greece or Hellas. There, they found a land of valleys and mountains, one of which, Mount Olympus, was so high, 2,917 meters or 9,750 feet. It seemed to touch the skies, the heavens. It therefore had to be the home of the gods. Since this peninsula was bounded on three sides by the sea, the Ionian, Aegean, and Mediterranean, the newcomers naturally looked for trade to neighboring maritime peoples as far afield as Asia Minor, eastern Turkey, and North Africa. From these ancient cultures, the Greek took music, poetry, and names of exotic deities like Hera and Athene. They also took their alphabet, probably from the Phoenicians, southern Syria. Foundation of Greek mythology. As city-states like Athens and Sparta grew and colonization developed, by the 5th century BC, hundreds of Greek communities had arisen, lying around the shores of the Mediterranean, like frogs about a pond, as Plato put it. The Black Sea, southern Italy, and North Africa. Small wonder that the Greek imagination peopled the seas with monsters, giants, and sirens whom heroes such as Jason, Odysseus, Theseus, and Heracles had to overcome. In 338 BC, Greece fell to Philip II of Macedonia, and soon became a part of Alexander the Great's empire. But, less than 2 centuries later, in 146 BC, the expanding power of Rome saw Greece reduced to a Roman province. That was not the end of Greek culture, however, for how many of its gods and heroes were adapted by the Romans under different names. Zeus became Jupiter, Aphrodite, Venus, and Heracles, Hercules. Greek belief in gods reached its peak between 800 and 330 BC. Every city of the ancient Greek world possessed its own myths, heroes, and festivals. Despite the diversity, there were rites and festivals, such as the Olympic Games, in which all freeborn Greeks could take part. In addition, the great epic poems of Homer, Hesiod, and other bards were known throughout the Greek world. Universal themes of the Argonauts journeying in search of the Golden Fleece, of the 12 tests of Heracles, of Odysseus' adventures on his return from the Trojan War, helped form a scene of nationhood. The myths were passed on and adapted by the storytelling tradition, from mouth to mouth. So, the pantheon of gods was well established by the time the myths were written down in about 750 BC. When Athens became the center of Greek intellectual life in the 5th century BC, while over half the adult male population of the city could read and write. The level of literacy in all Greek cities of this period was higher than at any period of Western culture before the 20th century. It is also important to bear in mind two factors. First, for many purposes, Greek culture remained as an oral culture. Second, literacy did not extend to slaves, who in Athens accounted for a third of the population, or women. Ancient Greece was not a true democracy, and the polis was essentially a male association. True, the most powerful figures seen in Greek tragedy are women and several goddesses. Hera, Athene, Demeter show more independence than their sisters in other pantheons, but only men were supposedly endowed with reason, logos, and were therefore the decision makers in the real society. Myth in society. For many centuries, Western civilization looked upon mythology as Greek mythology. Only when collections of myths were made from other cultures was it clear how unique Greek myths were and what an important role they played. Over the centuries, faith in the absolute veracity of the old tales gradually faded. But Greeks had never wholly believed in their own interpretations of nature and myth, so there is no standard version of a myth or tale or epic. In the traditional early versions of Jason and the Golden Fleece, of which only fragments remain, Jason's ill fortune is put down to the wiles of his wife Medea. Yet, later, Apollonius of Rhodes gave us a different version in which Medea is described as a victim of Jason's infidelity and madness. Again, Homer has the beautiful Helen as prize for Paris of Troy. He elopes with her, so causing the Trojan War. Later poets, Stesichorus, Euripides, however, deny that Helen ever went to Troy at all. The historian Herodotus sums it up when he says that Homer knew the story, but it was not such an attractive subject for verse. In his Republic, the philosopher Plato rejects virtually all the old myths, calling them immoral, and suggests new ones. Each new bard had the right to interpret historical tradition in his own way, and the audience did not feel obliged to accept any one as received truth. In fact, the very dynamic nature of myth was intended to stimulate discussion of each such virtues as truth, morality, and ethics. Greek myth is unusual in other ways. It very rarely involves talking animals, unlike myths from other parts of the world. Mostly, the incidents described are no more than an embellishment of everyday life, rather than fantasy adventures. The great bulk of Greek tales also feature heroes, men and women from a particular time and place. True, they have greater powers than ordinary mortals, but they are not all-powerful. In Homer's Iliad, when Diomedes and Patroclus attack the gods, Apollo reminds them, "Remember who you are. Gods and men can never be equal." By contrast, for example, Norse and Egyptian mythologies are far more concerned with gods than heroes. Another quality of myths is the educational role they played in society. In 5th century BC Athens, aristocratic boys had as many as 12 years of schooling divided into literature, music, and physical education. The literature element mainly meant learning verse myth by heart, taking in its moral content and debating issues raised. From Homer to the late tragedies, it is through myths that poets develop their deepest thoughts. The myths also provide a history of the Greek people, as well as contributing rich material for philosophical debates. In addition, they give ample subject matter for all the visual arts, from the great sculptures and statues adorning temples to mosaics and pottery paintings. Olympian gods. Ancient Greece had its cosmologies, myths of how the world began, and stories of the gods. Although the gods travel far and wide, they always return to their homes beyond the clouds on Mount Olympus. Hence, They are known as Olympic gods or Olympians. Each god has his or her own home, although they usually come together in the palace of Zeus, father of the gods. There, they feast on ambrosia and nectar served by the lovely goddess Hebe, entertained by Apollo and his lyre. It is an immortal world of feasting and discussion of the affairs of heaven and earth. Zeus, though known as the father of the gods, has a beginning. His father and mother are Kronos and Rhea, of the race of the Titans, themselves children of heaven, Uranus, and earth, Gaia. They, in turn, spring from the chaos, also known as the yawning abyss. Zeus and his two brothers, Poseidon and Hades, shared out the world, with Zeus taking the heavens, Poseidon the seas, and Hades the underworld. The lame god Hephaestus was architect, smith, and artist for the gods. He even forged thunderbolts which Zeus hurled at his enemies. In gratitude, Zeus gave him Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, as his wife. Some myths say that she was born of sea foam and clothed by the seasons. Eros, god of love, is her son. Armed with his bow and arrows, he fires his love darts into the hearts of gods and humans. Athene, goddess of wisdom, sprang fully adult from the head of Zeus. It was she who gave her name to the city of Athens and to the most famous of all Greek temples, the Parthenon, built between 447 and 438 BC, or Athene Parthenos, Athene the Virgin. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, is usually seen wearing a winged cap and sandals. He is also the god of trade, wrestling, and other sports, even thieving. Whatever requires skill and dexterity. Dionysus, god of wine, presides over sacred festivals to mark the grape harvest, wine being sacred and its drinking ritualized. Dionysus is often portrayed with male and female satyrs, horned creatures, half human, half goat, and Maenads, fauns, since he is also the god of passion. Many temples were named after him and festivals held in his name. The 9 Muses, who were daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, memory, were originally goddesses of memory, but later each became identified with song, verse, dance, comedy, tragedy, astronomy, history, art, and science. 3 Graces, also Zeus's daughters, bestow beauty and charm on humans and preside over banquets, dancing, and all elegant entertainment. The 3 Fates control every person's birth, life, and death. Also known as the Cruel Fates, they spent their time spinning the threads of human destiny and cutting them with shears whenever they wish. Finally, the 3 Furies punish all transgressors mercilessly, usually with a deadly sting. Greeks prefer to call them the Eumenides, good-tempered ones, as it would have been bad luck to use their proper name. Origins of humanity. Early Greek mythology had no agreed account of the origin of humanity. Sometimes humans emerged from clay, stones, or ash trees. Much later, Plato claimed that the first man was a round ball with 8 limbs, but Zeus cut him in half to form the first man and woman. The best known origin tale is that concerning the Titan Prometheus, who one day made a man out of clay and water in the image of the gods. But he had to pay his price for his bold deed. To help men, Prometheus, whose name means forethought, stole fire from the sun's chariot and took it to earth hidden in a fennel stalk. Zeus was furious. He ordered Hephaestus to make a woman out of clay and send her down to earth. Her name was Pandora, and being made in heaven, she possessed every possible gift, including curiosity. At the home of Prometheus's brother, the slow-witted Epidemius, meaning afterthought, was a sealed jar that Pandora was told never to open. Of course, she opened it, so releasing all the suffering and torment that beset humans' lives to this very day. In fear, she replaced the lid, trapping just one thing inside: hope. The jar became known as Pandora's box. Zeus then took revenge on Prometheus. He had him chained to a rock on Mount Caucasus, where an eagle pecked out his liver. Being immortal, he could not die. The liver grew back in the night, and his torment started again with each new day. In another myth, Zeus sent a flood to drown all humans. Deucalion, Prometheus' son, and his wife Pyrrha, daughter of Pandora and Epidemius, built an ark in which they survived the flood. Ending up on Mount Parnassus, they prayed at the Oracle of Delphi and were told to throw stones over their shoulders as they walked along. Those tossed by Deucalion turned into men, those by Pyrrha into women. Thus, the human race was recreated on Earth. According to Hesiod in his Works and Days, there were 5 ages of humanity. The first, the Golden Age, people lived in peace and plenty. The earth gave its riches freely, wine flowed from the vine, and milk came of its own accord from cows and sheep. Inasmuch as people never grew old, death was no more terrible than falling asleep. In the course of time, the Golden Age gave way to the Silver Age. For the first time, the year was divided into seasons, and people had to build homes to protect themselves from winter wind and autumn rain. Since all sons were subject to their mothers, there were no cause for war. It was not until the Bronze Age that evil entered people's hearts and wars started. Fear, greed, and hatred ruled the earth. Next came the Heroic Age, when Zeus restored some human virtues in order to see heroes through the Trojan War and other semi-mythical events of early Greek history. But the worst age of all was the Iron Age, when weapons of iron helped people destroy each other. Yet, people always lived in hope that the ages would be repeated over time. One day, Cronus would return and bring back the Golden Age. Nature would again produce her gifts freely. Snake and weed would lose their own poison. Goats and sheep would come home without need of a shepherd, and sheep would grow fleece in different colors. The Trojan War. The heroic period is not some remote and dateless past. It spanned only 2 or 3 generations, focusing on the Trojan War. This can be dated back to the 20th century BC, based on archaeological findings. Scholars have calculated that Troy fell around 1190 BC. The reason that the myths of this period are so well known is thanks to the oral storytelling tradition, from which one man, Homer, stands out. Homer's epic poetry, especially his Iliad and Odyssey, is truly a jewel, the crown of Western literature. The tales related by storytellers were important to Greeks because they told the story of their ancestors and glorious past. Homer's epic and other verses were widely performed, and children learned them in school. They described a heroic age in which gods freely intervened in human affairs. The mortals had to know their limits. But heroes were brave and adventurous, unafraid of self-sacrifice. Thus, when the warrior hero Achilles is offered a choice by the fates of a long life of ease or a short one with immortal glory, he naturally chose the latter. Troy, called Ilium in antiquity, hence the Iliad, was a city located near the coast in Asia Minor, eastern Turkey. Troy was strategically important because it guarded the Hellespont Straits. The story starts with Paris of Troy, who is asked to judge a beauty contest between Hera, Athene, and Aphrodite. Each promises a reward. Hera, untold wealth; Athene, wisdom and fame; and Aphrodite, the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris opts for Aphrodite, so earning the eternal enmity of Hera and Athene. Paris's prize is Helen, wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Enchanted by the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topmost towers of the Ilium, Faustus Christopher Marlowe. Paris elopes with Helen to Troy. Alone among the Trojans, Paris' sister, Cassandra, foretells the destruction of Troy brought by the abduction. His brother, Agamemnon, king of Argos, Menelaus organizes a great fleet to sail to Troy. The Greeks set up camp outside Troy and besiege it for nigh on 10 years. It is at this point that Homer takes up the story. Two of the most famous Greek warriors, Achilles and Odysseus, first refuse to join the expedition, but are finally tricked into going. Achilles is a typical Greek hero, strong and proud, but also brutal and headstrong, embodying the paradox of the hero, as seen especially in Heracles. Like many other heroes, he was brought up by the hills and the wise tutor Chiron, a centaur. His mother, hoping to make him invincible, dipped the young Achilles into the river Styx. The heel by which she held him remained the only vulnerable part of his body. During the siege, Achilles falls out with Agamemnon over the king's acceptance of a Trojan priest's daughter, Chryseis, as war's spoil. Achilles refused to fight and lends his armor to his best friend, Patroclus, who is killed in battle by the Trojan commander Hector, King Priam of Troy's eldest son. Achilles returns to the fray bent on revenge. He pursues Hector 3 times round the walls of Troy and finally kills him in a sword fight. Such is Achilles' fury that he mutilates Hector's corpse and refuses to return it to Priam for burial. However, the angry gods force him to hand over the body, and recklessly he continues fighting, or being killed by an arrow shot in his heel by Paris. In turn, Paris is killed by a Greek archer. Iliad ends with the games held for Hector's funeral. Creatures and monsters. Many are the horrifying monsters sent to test the strength and guile of Greek heroes: Jason, Heracles, Odysseus, Perseus, Theseus. They all had to journey to the very edge of known civilization and beyond into the realms of fantasy, where time and again they have to overcome giants, dragons, many-headed serpents, sirens, huge bulls, and sea monsters of every sort. The creatures of Greek myth are the architectural villains of the European consciousness, rich material for the fertile imaginations of artists, poets, and children. Some monsters, notably the giants, differ from men mainly in their size and ugliness. The human giants, such as the Cyclops, with one eye in the middle of their forehead, King Amycus of Bebrycis, covered in thick black hair and beaten by the Argonauts Odysseus in a boxing match, or Anacus, who was defeated by Heracles at wrestling, resemble ordinary mortals in proportions and join in love and war with them. Superhuman giants, on the other hand, war with even the gods and are vastly grander proportions. Typhon, with his 100 arms, makes war on Zeus, who slays him with a thunderbolt. He is so huge that it takes Mount Etna to cover the corpse. His brother, Claudius, provides the flames of Mount Etna's volcano with his breath. For his part in the war against Zeus, the Titan Atlas has to hold up the heavens on his shoulders. It is Atlas's 3 daughters, the Hesperides, who bring Heracles the magical golden apples. It can hardly have been coincidence that many of the monsters who test heroes are female. Oedipeus, who has further troubles with women, unwittingly marrying his own mother, has a trial with the Sphinx, who has a woman's head and breasts, a lion's body, and a bird's wings. The Harpies, fierce winged creatures with sharp claws, possess women's faces. These filthy beasts snatch food from the blind Phineas during Jason's journey to Colchis. The 3 Gorgon sisters, led by Medusa, had writhing snakes for hair and can turn their victims to stone with a single glance. With divine aid, Perseus cuts off Medusa's head while looking at her reflection in a polished shield. Not all female monsters are ugly brutes. Beautiful femme fatales have to trap unweary heroes include the sirens, half women, half birds, whose songs so bewitches sailors that they throw themselves overboard and drown. Argonauts escape by having Orpheus drown out their song with his lyre, while Odysseus has himself bound to the mast while his sailors fill their ears with wax. Dryope and her sister Naiads, the 50 daughters of the sea god Nereus, are lovely nymphs who entice Hylas, the Argonauts, down into their pool. Amazon queen Hippolyte and Heracles' wife, Deianira, both meet their end through witchcraft. The abundance of female monsters preying on men stem, it would seem, from the male fear of infidelity by wives and their belief that women are different from men and their prediction for the blacker, more orgiastic and less rational aspects of belief and ritual. Myth is a way of endorsing and defining women's natural role as loyal, obedient wives and mothers and legitimizing the male-dominated patriarchal society. Human heroes and demigods. The distinction between heroes and demigods is unclear. While some heroes, like Jason and Oedipeus, are sons of mortal parents, Others, like Heracles, Perseus, and Achilles, come from the union of gods and goddesses, mortals. Zeus and Alcmene produce Heracles. His name, glory to Hera, was meant to appease Zeus's wife, the goddess Hera. Zeus and Danae produced Perseus. Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis were responsible for Achilles. While rumors of divine intervention surround both Theseus, Poseidon is his putative father, and Odysseus, the putative bastard son of Sisyphus, offspring of Aeolus, god of winds. Many rival states claimed as a hero of their founder and protector, no doubt embellishing their role and origins. Theseus of Athens, Jason of Iolcos, Ajax of Salamis. Noble families who asserted a hero as their ancestor. Alexander the Great, for example, claimed descent from both Achilles and the Egyptian god Ammon, and insisted that his own semi-divine status was recognized throughout Greece. Bards, including Homer and Hesiod, who sang for their living, often took their care to extol the ancestor of their patrons and audiences. The catalogue of ships in Homer's Iliad leaves no Greek state off the roll of ancient glory. The 50 Argonauts are each attributed to a Greek noble family. The figure most akin to a national hero is Heracles. He never settled in any one city that could take full credit for his exploits, and his wanderings carried him beyond the bounds of Greece, far into Africa and Asia Minor. He is one of the earliest mythical heroes to be featured in Greek art, dating from the 8th century BC, and on the coins of city-states, on which he is usually depicted strangling snakes while in his cradle. As a symbol of national patriotism, he is the only hero to be revered throughout Greece. He is also the only hero to be granted immortality. What makes Greek heroes particularly interesting is their depiction by bards as deeply complex characters. Typically, they follow a common pattern: unnatural birth, returned home as a prodigal sons after separated at an early age, exploits against monsters to prove their manhood, and subsequent kingship or glorious death. Super strong and courageous they may be, mostly noble and honorable, but all had to contend with a ruthless streak and often outweighs the good. Heracles, for example, hurls his wife and child into a fire in a fit of madness, and his uncontrollable lust forces him on King Thespius's 50 daughters in a single night. Nor is he averse to homosexual affairs, with Hylas, for instance, though Greek pederasty is mostly excluded from the myths. Despite recapturing the Golden Fleece for Greece, Jason never finds contentment. He deserts his wife, Medea, and dies while the Argo's rotting prow falls on him. Theseus is also disloyal to his wife, Erne, abandoning her on the island of Naxos. He kills his Amazon wife, Antiope, and causes the death of both his son Hippolytus and his father Aegeus. Even the noble and fearless Achilles, the Greek hero of the Trojan War, a man who cannot bear dishonorable contact, violates the dead hero's code by desecrating Hector's corpse and refusing to hand it over to the Trojans. Like the heroes, therefore, cities that turn their heroes' burial places into shrines and oracles receive good fortune, but they also risk the hero's unpredictable temper. Sources of Greek myth. Greek myth has been passed down principally from songs and plays. In ancient Greece, myth dominated the subject matter of both. From generation to generation, professional bards known as rhapsodies committed to memory whole epics which they passed then on. The earliest of these epics, known as us as the Iliad and the Odyssey, though both refer to common earlier epics which are now lost. It was not until about 750 BC that the epics were written down for the first time. In the middle of the 8th century BC, about the same time as the first epics were written, were made. A wandering minstrel by the name of Homer became the first of his possession to benefit from the new written records. The Iliad and Odyssey are narrative poems, both many hundreds of pages long, which tell the tale of Greek gods and heroes. The Iliad centers on the Trojan War, and besides the warrior heroes like Achilles, Ajax, Hector, and Odysseus. It describes the many gods on Mount Olympus and their various responsibilities, habits, and phobias. The Odyssey is concerned with the hero Odysseus's 10-year return home from the Trojan War. There the verses concentrate only on the last 40 days. It is a poem of the sea as well as land, and reaches into the realms of fable, even the underworld, introducing us to the Lotus Eaters, Cyclops, Sirens, Scylla, Charybdis. Both the Iliad and Odyssey constitute truly great literature and encapsulate virtually all we know of Greek mythology. Ironically, our knowledge of their author is extremely sketchy. The many ancient accounts of the life of the poet, as he simply was known, have him as a blind bard from Chios, born about 750 BC, Herodotus. But there is absolutely no evidence to verify this. We do not even know if he could read or write. All we can say that is, then as now, epics ascribed to Homer emanate from a unique interaction between tradition and individual talent. Other great rhapsodist was Hesiod, who was composing poems and winning singing competitions about 50 years after Homer in 700 BC. Not only was he evidently first to write his songs down in his main epics, Theogony and Works and Days, he was the first author of a systematic mythology. It is from Hesiod that we learn of the creation, beginning of the gods, and the world. Although Hesiod gives us no account of the creation of humanity, he does tell us of Prometheus and Pandora. Both Homer and Hesiod were born in Asia Minor, and their interpretations of mythology show many similarities with ancient Sumerian and other Near Eastern civilizations, like the Phoenicians, Hurrians, and Hittites. Nowhere else, however, have myths attained such a peak of written excellence as in the Greek epics. Philosophies later challenge a literal belief in mythology. The Greek philosopher Plato, 427 to 347 BC, an aristocratic Athenian, especially criticizes many of the myths immortalized by Homer and Hesiod, representing gods and heroes as morally flawed and vengeful characters. Such characters would have no place in his ideal society, which he describes in the Republic. In his work, the Timaeus, he provides his own cosmology. All the epic bards, dramatists, and philosophers shown that his Greek mythology was ever changing. giving rise to yet more exciting artistic productions in every area of creativity. The underworld. The afterlife was of great importance to the ancient Greeks. Beyond the grave, or funeral pyre, lay a land of shadows, the underworld. It was ruled by Hades, brother of Zeus and Poseidon, who also gave his name to his dark realm, because the gloomy underworld was opposed to bright heavenly Olympus. Hades was not accepted as an Olympian god, and his servants were never invited to sup in Zeus's palace. Dead souls were taken by Hermes, messenger of the gods, down through gloomy caves and long winding underground paths until they come to the 5 rivers. First, they must be ferried by Chiron across the black river Styx, the gates of Hades, which are guarded by the 3-headed hound Cerberus. Once inside, they must then cross 4 more rivers: Black Acheron, woe; Glaucodon, fire; salt-tiered Cocytitis, wailing; and Lethe, oblivion. Unless the soul has money, put in the corpse's mouth to pay the ferryman. Ghosts will be left to wander for 100 years on the far side of the Styx. Once across the 5 infernal rivers, the dead go before 3 stern judges: Minos, Rathmadanes, and Aeacus, who help Hades assess people's lives and determine their fate. Except no heroes might find themselves assigned to the blissful Elysian fields, also known as the Isles of the Blessed, far off in the western seas, where they can relive the joys of life without memory of their sins. For those whose crimes were bad enough to warrant a sentence to eternal punishment, there are special torments in the darkest regions of Erebus and Tartarus, where they are deprived of oblivion, being eternally reminded of their sins. This is true of King Tantalus, who stole nectar and ambrosia from the gods. His punishment was to find that food and drink are always just beyond his grasp. Hence, our word tantalize. Those who have done evil are also handed over to the 3 merciless Furies, Irenaeus, before they let off to their own appointed torment. For the common dead, neither very good or very bad, their sad fate is to dwell forever in shadowy gloom. On occasion, they may see a glimpse of a strange garden of Persephone, queen of the underworld, with its bloomless poppies, pale bed of rushes and green grapes, which he crushes into deadly wine. Few heroes or gods manage to venture down into Hades and return. Those who do often meet a sad fate. 3 best-known figures to achieve this are Heracles, Orpheus, and Persephone. Heracles' last test is to bring up the hound Cerberus. He is led by Hermes to a cave near Sparta, from which he descends into Hades, passing the Fates and Furies, eventually coming to the gloomy palace of King Hades and Queen Persephone. Hades gives him the hound to see if he can overcome it with his bare hands. He does so, but returns it to Hades, having accomplished his mission. Orpheus, the greatest of all singers, is grief-stricken when his beloved wife, Eurydice, dies. So, he goes with his lyre into the underworld and persuades Hades to let Eurydice return to Earth. Hades agrees, but there is one condition. Orpheus must not look back at his wife as he leads her out. Sadly, at the exit, He looks round at her, and she has to return to Hades forever. In his grief, he pledges never to remarry, and a band of women suitors angrily cut him to pieces. Yet, even after his death, his head and lyre continue to sing and play.